Hey guys, it's Goosebumps Completionist, and today I'm bringing you a book review from the Hall of Horrors book series. And it's book number 4, Why I Quit Zombie School. I'm not gonna lie, I'm not impressed with this book. And it's such a travesty because I am such a big fan of Hall of Horrors from what I've read so far. This is the 4th Hall of Horrors book I have read. The only 2 I have not read as of yet is The 5 Masks of Dr. Scream and Claws. The first 3 I read, Don't Scream, Night of the Giant Everything, and The Birthday Party of No Return, I've really enjoyed those. Even though some of the books were playing on former ideas that Stein has already done in the past, but at least they offered a fresh take to those ideas in some aspects. This book, however, is a copy and paste directly from a previous Goosebumps story that's already been kind of copy and pasted before. And it's marred with problems for me, and I'll get into that near the end of the video. I don't feel like explaining them all now, but I just have to say I'm not really impressed with this. But I do understand how some people might really love this book, especially if they grew up with the modern era of Goosebumps and were introduced to series like this first. I could totally see why somebody would love this book. Like I said, I'm just not the biggest fan of it. Okay. So let's get into the plot overview without giving too much away. So this kid named Matt, in his family, he has an older sister and 2 parents. They have downsized houses. And his parents have decided, since they've downsized houses and Matt is kind of disconnected from the rest of the family because he's so obsessed with horror, which, by the way, I really relate to Matt on that aspect. I normally like characters like Matt when they have this horror interest. I just connect with them because I was that kid too, you know? So, off the bat, I was immediately able to plug myself into Matt, which I really enjoyed. Matt, like I said, has grown disconnected from his family, and his parents basically think that he's become a nuisance to the family, and they feel like since they have this extra money, they're going to send him to boarding school. So they found this school on the internet without actually going to visit it, which should be the first red flag. But they end up at this boarding school, and the boarding school is called the Romero Boarding School. Yes, the story is called Why I Quit Zombie School. And if you're familiar with the last name Romero, there's a prolific director and creator, George Romero, who made Night of the Living Dead and, of course, basically invented the zombie film genre. Stein was paying respects with this, and there's a couple of meta references in this book to iconic film creators that are kind of funny, and you'll see that throughout this book. But on the way to the Romero boarding school, Matt and his sister have this, argument about, Matt's horror interest, and Matt doesn't care. He's brought a couple of his collection with him to decorate his dorm room because he wants a little bit of his, passion to be with him at this new school, away from his family. He's kind of bittersweet about it, but he's going to be optimistic until he sees the school itself, which has these big impenetrable walls. It has a casting shadow all over the school. It's like eerily dark, but there's nothing to create the shadow. And he's like really weirded out by that. And as they drive through the impenetrable gate, he notices these kids messing with something near the garbage, and it looks like these 3 kids are eating a squirrel. And almost immediately, Matt freaks out and tries to convince his parents, hey, these kids are eating a squirrel over there. I don't want to go to this school. And it kind of sets the tone for the rest of the book, because from here on out, it becomes a you gotta believe me story, very reminiscent to a How I Met My Monster situation, as I'll get into, and it gets very, very repetitive here. But the parents, you're saying, hey, come on, quit pulling our leg. Let's go meet the principal. And the principal's name is Mr. Craven. Now, Mr. Craven is this really creepy guy. Unfortunately, the story never really delves into him much. I think he maybe makes another appearance one other time after this. But Mr. Craven's pretty weird, and he's a kooky guy. Creeps Matt out really bad. And the principal tells him that they're going to send him to a student to kind of show him around the school while the parents and the principal go talk and fill out paperwork. And eventually Matt will meet his parents in his dorm. So Matt finds this girl named Franny. Now Franny is a quiet girl. She doesn't really talk all that much. But Matt is, trying to make a friend, and he's trying to be nice to Franny. But almost immediately, he notices that there's some kids in this school that are extremely weird. And there's a scene where these two really tall, I think twins, their names are escaping me, but these twins come and face Matt, and he notices that their eyes don't have, retinas or pupils. They're ghost white. And they have weird-looking skin, bluish in tone. They have, some characteristics about them that just feel off. You know what I mean? And it's very off-putting. And so after he meets the twins decide to take him to the gymnasium where he gets to see gym class. And, Matt, he's a big sports guy. He wants to be on the soccer team. He wants to play sports at the school. That's something he's looking forward to. And he notices the kids in the gym are extremely slow. And he's like, man, if the kids are these slow, I'm going to be the star athlete of the whole team, right? But there's a scene that happens that kind of disturbs Matt, where one of the twins falls down off the bleachers in the gym and falls down and falls down and falls down and then crushes. Basically, there's a very descriptive scene where you read that the kid crushed his skull. And then he learns that none of the students react at all to the kid crushing his skull. And then this really creeps him out, and all the students keep looking at him funny. He's like screaming bloody murder to get the guy some help. And eventually some, teachers come in and take him to what's known as the Reviver Room. And Matt's like, what is the Reviver Room? What is this place? And he's very freaked out, and he just wants to go find his parents and beg them to take him home with them so he doesn't have to be here anymore. And he's like, look, this kid crushed his skull. Nobody said anything. There's this weird room called the Reviver Room, and his parents are like, yeah, Matt. Have fun at boarding school, and they peace out. And they basically leave Matt here. Now, this is where the story starts to get weird. It's one of those, like I said, you gotta believe me stories. After his parents leave, he eventually gets to interact with Franny again, and he's trying to convince. He keeps asking Franny, "What's going on with kids at the school?" And Franny doesn't really tell him much. She says, "Hey, look, you just try to make yourself fit in. Everything should be okay." And Matt goes to the commons one day, like the lunch commons, and he sees these kids falling off this balcony in the lunch commons, and they're jumping off and just splatting themselves on the floor and getting up and walking away. And Matt's like, this is really freaky, like, why are people jumping off? And he starts to notice that the food that they're eating is weird. The food looks like raw meat. The food looks like putrid, expired fruit. And he puts two and two together and basically starts to infer that there are zombies at this school. Later on, he interacts with Franny again. There's this big scene where he's talking to Franny, and Franny suspects that maybe Matt isn't a student that really belongs at the school. So she asks him, "When did you die?" And that sets Matt. He goes, "What are you talking about? I'm alive." And then Franny basically says, "Look, I'm alive too. This is a legitimate zombie school. You need to pretend that you're dead, because if you don't, they're going to suspect you and bad things will happen to you." Now, this basically confirms that Matt's, you gotta believe me story finally broke through to Franny, and now Matt has to figure out how to stay alive. There comes this point where there's a parent visit meeting thing where they get to come for breakfast one day and visit the school, and Matt's like, this is my plan to escape. So when his parents come, he devises this plan for them to go talk to Franny, and Franny's going to come clean about the school to his parents so he can leave the school, because he basically has put two and two together that the kids at the school are zombies, and if they find out he's living, he's probably good as dead. So he, of course, the parents arrive. They go to visit Matt, and they're like, let's go get some breakfast. And he tells them about the breakfast food, and the food is like expired stuff. And they get to the lunchroom, and the parents can only pay attention to the kids throwing food, and they reminisce about it when they were kids. They would have full-on food fights for some reason. Like, these parents are terrible, by the way, in this book. Parents are just awful and oblivious to their own child. And then their phone goes off and starts ringing, and it's his older sister, and they're like automatically concerned about the older sister now. And meanwhile, they're completely oblivious to one of the zombie kids falling off the balcony playing bungee jump, that's what they call it, and splattering on the floor. They don't pay attention to it. And then they get off the phone, and Matt's like, okay, I got one last shot before they leave after breakfast. He goes over to Franny, and Franny basically does him wrong and doesn't tell the parents the truth, and the parents go off, and Matt has his somber goodbye in his head. He's like, well, next time they see me, I'll be dead. Goodbye. This is the last time I'll ever see my parents. So Matt figures that he's basically screwed being at the school now, and he's gonna have to try to adapt the best way he can, just lay low, try to blend himself into the best he can. He has to consciously do that because there's a scene like where he's like at soccer practice, and he kicks a kid in his arm by accident, or his leg, I think, and the leg falls off. Traumatic stuff like that, and he realizes that he has to pretend to be slow and pretend to act like a zombie and fall over on purpose, stuff like that. And Franny, assures him just keep doing that and everything will be fine. But there is a scene in this book that I think this is probably the best scene, where he goes to confront Franny after his parents leave, and he's like, how could you do that to me? And Franny still pretended to be oblivious, and her roommate, her dorm mate was in there, and Franny was like, hey, look, I couldn't tell everybody, I couldn't tell them in front of everybody, because if I did, we both would have been outed. And he's like, okay, I understand. And she's like, well, you should try to go to the dance coming up soon. So yeah, and then the story turns into this whole dance event. Now, this dance event is probably the big climax of the book, I would say. Matt goes to the dance, and he gets to dance with this girl after, being coached from Franny again, and she touches him, and she's like, he's warm. And then all these people start to notice Matt is warm now, and this scares Matt terribly. And Matt has a close call where, he kind of dressed himself up to look more zombie-ish for the party. He had a fake hand on him. They try to take him up to the bungee jumping spot in the commons area, and he diffuses the situation there, and he basically gets out scot-free. And then there's another instance after the dance where he finds himself in a pickle again, and he has to basically run away from the zombies out of the gym, and he runs out into the courtyard and jumps over the impenetrable fence, finds his way over, and he stumbles into this graveyard where, plot twist, the gravestones of the kids that he goes to school with are there. And one of them is, you guessed it, Franny. And after his ordeal with Franny, he decides to up his game on his zombie disguise here, and what happens to him is that the zombie disguise looks a little bit too real. Like, it looks like he has this fake foot that looks like he's missing his toes, and these zombie kids are like, we got to take you to the reviver room. You need to be patched up. They completely keep forgetting that they chased him one time and they suspected him for being warm. But finally, he gets to go inside of this reviver room, and let's just say there's a guy in there called the Reviver, and there's this borderline, I guess, climactic scene, with I say that with quotations, and then the story ends after the event in the Reviver Room. There's a summarized ending where Matt either escapes school or not, and that's basically why I quit zombie school. Now, let's get into the strengths first, because I don't want to get into the negatives immediately here, but the strengths on this book definitely are Matt as a character. I feel like he's just, a person at the wrong place at the wrong time, really. I don't really knock his personality and his interests. I really find a lot of myself in Matt. There's some scenes in this book that are genuinely scary for body horror element, taken into consideration there. Very scary stuff. Even though it's borderline gross out and kind of removes me from that in some ways, still pretty effective on the body horror. One of the more descriptive Goosebumps books, I have to say. And honestly, the school is pretty creepy, I'm not going to lie. This whole concept of the Reviver Room is very eerie, and it's just so weird how these zombies get taken to the infirmary, and some of them can reemerge out of this infirmary looking like nothing ever happened to them. It's a very weird room, and it's shrouded in mystery. But getting into the negatives, a lot of the stuff introduced in this book, like Mr. Craven, the Reviver Room, the origin of the zombies even, there's no explanation of anything. It's so skimmed. Like, when the whole graveyard scene happens, I was expecting maybe some tragic story with the zombie kids. Nothing. Mr. Craven, I thought he was going to be like the big bad of the book. No. The Reviver Room, I thought that was going to be like the main twist of the book, and that was how it's going to end. It kind of was, but no. Also, this story feels like a carbon copy of Ghoul School. I've said this in the past about Creature Teacher kind of taking the idea from Ghoul School and making it better. This book is a carbon copy to the T, with the zombie disguises, even with the plot setup, with the friend trying to help him, escape the people out to get him, in the school that are monsters, or in this case, zombies. It's basically the same exact story. And not to boot, the ending is not good. I mean, it's just not a good ending. I hate summarized endings to something like this. Just make it a special edition and boost the ending. Offer some origin, something. This book just doesn't hit on that originality, or it doesn't hit on the explanation. It just focuses all of the areas of the book are focused with interacting with the kids in the school, and the "you gotta believe me" arc. And oh my god, that "you gotta believe me" setup to a Goosebumps book is getting old in modern Goosebumps. This has happened a couple of times now, and this one is pretty profound, just as bad as How I Met My Monster. At least in How I Met My Monster, the main character, there was a path to discovery through that process. As in this book, Matt, he starts in a complacent state with him being a nuisance to his parents, basically, and his family. And yet, by the end, he's basically in the same position as he was in the beginning of the story. It just, overall, the story feels like it doesn't really go anywhere. The character doesn't really expand or grow from the situations. All the interesting elements don't get expanded upon, and it's not original. But I wouldn't say it's a terrible book. Like I said in the beginning, I don't think it's a terrible book, but I do find it quite abysmal. So when it comes from a 0 to 5 star rating, I knew it was not going to get above a 4 on this. Not even a 3.5. It was going to be in that 3 to 3.4 meh territory. But with all those problems I mentioned, all added up, and I deducted 1.9 off the top from 5, and I gave this book a 3.1 out of 5. This is a very sad rating for a Hall of Horrors book for me, but I think it's pretty deserved here. It's not good, but it's not bad. That's how I feel about it. So yeah, that's my thoughts on why I quit zombie school. Let me know in the comment section. Did you love this or did you hate this? I'm dying to know, and I'll see you next time.